All right, welcome everybody. My name is Mayor Gina Lichty, and we are incredibly grateful and thankful to the folks at the Convention and Visitors Bureau of Elkhart County, the Elkhart County Community Foundation, Vibrant Communities, weIMPACT, and Connect in Elkhart County for putting together a series of lectures for our community to think about how our communities are developing and what all of us can contribute as leaders and investors in our cities in making them truly great. Now, when we think about property investments and development and restoration, there's been quite a renaissance of taking old buildings and turning them into the next phase of something useful and new. Look around you. You will recognize that this building was once a garage and today is a retail space and concert venue. In addition to that, there's City Hall that was once a Carnegie Library, the Hawks Artist and Entrepreneur Housing that was once a furniture factory, the Spawn Building where you could once buy supplies to treat your animals for distemper. Goshen Brewing Company was the former NIPSCO power plant. Goshen Farmers Market was once a lumber yard. The Warehouse Climbing Company was once a train depot. And the old bag factory, you could probably guess what they used to do there. Goshen has been particularly adept at this combination of celebrating the arts while also making investments in entrepreneurship. And we pay a lot of honor to our manufacturing legacy in our community that has helped us become an economic powerhouse throughout northern Indiana. And while we celebrate all of those exceptional accomplishments in the furniture industry and medical supplies and RVs, and repurposing old buildings to make new spaces. We also have new innovations, like just down the street, we have Janus Motorcycle Company that's building hand-built motorcycles that are world-renowned. And in addition to that, Goshen continues to hang on and continue to develop and expand on our arts culture in our community. We have multiple artist guilds that are home to hundreds of artists throughout our community. The Painters Guild, the Clay Artists Guild, Woodworkers Guild, Jewelers Guild, Photographers Guild, nationally recognized ceramicists that host an annual event that's coming up in just a couple weekends. Make sure you visit the Michiana Pottery Tour. And there are numerous places where everyone from kids to adults can have the opportunity to engage and take art lessons. Our community is so invested in our kids and education. The Boys and Girls Club of Goshen offers kids, every kid in Goshen, age 6 through high school, the opportunity to take, not only to get care after school, but to have free music lessons for the annual cost of $30 a year. And that only happens through a community that's willing to step up and make sure that the arts and kids and education and innovation is part of who we are. And the reason that we're able to do that, long before the state of Indiana recognized that collaboration was a competitive advantage, the city of Goshen and the city of Elkhart and the city of Napanee and our surrounding community recognized that we all rise and fall together. And so that's why we're making these important lecture opportunities throughout the county so that we can learn new and innovative ways to continue to build on that idea of how do we collaborate together? How do we continue to build additional success in our community? We're not resting on our laurels. We've talked about a lot of the accomplishments that Goshens already have. Through READY grants and initiatives, the city of Goshen is looking at new and innovative housing projects, new and innovative communities that are multi-use, an entirely re-envisioned and reimagined pool project that will be state-of-the-art and provide decades of entertainment for young people, as well as working to address housing needs at every level of housing throughout our community, while upholding that, keeping our eye on all the importance of arts, aesthetics, creativity, and entrepreneurship. I'm excited because I know that the brains and the strength that we need for the future innovation are already right here. The fact that you all showed up tonight, took time out of your day to come and listen and learn, is a testament to the strength of our community. So I am very excited to listen and learn from Mayor Brainard, and I'm very appreciative to Dave Weaver, who's here to talk a little bit more about weIMPACT and their role in the Building Blocks program. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dave Weaver. I want to start by welcoming you here this evening to our second Building Blocks Talks event. Thanks for joining us on this beautiful evening, and Mayor Gina, thanks for hosting us in your beautiful downtown. We greatly appreciate it. We started Building Blocks Talks to bring together great thought leaders and practitioners in community development, urban planning, architecture, and policy. With members of the community. As we experience unprecedented investment in this region, we want to ensure we convene with a thoughtful approach to these opportunities, working together to build the best towns possible right here in Elkhart County. Tonight, we'd like to welcome Mayor Jim Brainard. Jim is Carmel's first 7-term mayor, serving from 1996 to 2023, and is one of the longest-serving mayors in the United States. Under his leadership, Carmel experienced tremendous growth and prosperity. It's considered one of the fastest-growing cities in the United States. The population has grown from 25,000 residents when he started to 105,000 today in the last 28 years. Parkland, green space, and trails increased from 40 acres to 1,000 acres, including the nationally recognized Monon Trail. The development of the Arts District, a new downtown called City Center, and a new Midtown project, joining the two together, has helped in the creation of a vibrant, thriving, walkable city where companies want to locate, where employees want to live, and where families want to raise their children. Mayor Brainard is frequently asked to speak around the world about city planning, climate change, redevelopment, and transportation networks. While he's often traveling the world, we're lucky to have Jim here tonight. He's a native of Elkhart County, raised right down the street in Bristol, Indiana. He has an incredible heart for this work and for this community. Please help me in welcoming Mayor Jim Brainard. Do you want him to have this microphone or work from there?
Thank you, Dave. It's good to be here. Mayor Lichty, where'd you go? There, all right. My father grew up at 220 South 7th Street in Goshen, and because of the band program at Goshen High School, decided to become a band director and obtained his bachelor and master's degree. We lost him a few years ago, but he spent his entire life as a band director in Bristol and then Elkhart, and it would have pleased him greatly to hear about what you're doing for your music students in Goshen. Where's Jeremy? Mayor Stutzman's back there too. So thank you for coming. I want to talk to you afterwards about what life is like after being mayor. I'm still trying to figure that out. It's great to be here, and my next door neighbor, and I was a little kid, showed up. I haven't seen in years. Thank you. What I want to do today is tell you Carmel's story and what we did, and it may be helpful to you, it may not, but I think it's an interesting story. And I studied history for my undergrad in college and at Butler, and so I always try to put things in historical context. When I first ran for mayor in 1995, I had not been on the city council. You know, politicians, one of the first things when they do a survey to see if they have a chance of winning or not is to ask the question, what's the name idea? And mine was at 0 when I ran. But we won. We worked really hard. But as part of that process, I knocked on thousands of doors in Carmel. Back then, Carmel was about 90% Republican. And so we didn't have an election in the fall. Just the primary in the spring was the election. And it's not the case today. But then it was. And so I asked people in January, February, March, and April of 1995 what their hopes and dreams were for our city. I said, you've decided to live here, build your businesses here. What would you like to see Carmel? He said, I wish we had a downtown. And that was important because we didn't have a downtown. At the close of World War II, Carmel had about 500 people living in it. It was an old Quaker agricultural community back then, quite a ways from the edge of Indianapolis. Not today, it's all connected. But what I heard in 1,000 different ways was a yearning for a place where people could walk where they needed to go, like Goshen was when I was a kid. I remember my grandparents, they didn't have a car for years. They walked where they needed to go. A place where there were places where people from all different parts of the community, regardless of background, regardless of race, regardless of economic status, regardless of place of origin, could come together and get to learn about each other and that person's different experiences. And I think that's particularly important today when we have all these huge partisan divides, that people have an opportunity to get to know people with different experiences than they have. And those things happen in city centers, the part of the city that everybody feels some ownership of. Carmel didn't have that. It had a little 2.5 block downtown of empty old warehouse buildings. Had a dive bar. It had a pool hall that hadn't changed, I think, since about 1930. And it had, I think that was it. It was all takeout restaurant, Chinese restaurant, I think. But that was it for downtown Carmel. And it was a city of 25,000 people at that point. It had some nice retail strip centers scattered around, but no downtown. And that's what people said they wanted. And people talked about the parking lots. Buildings are torn down all the time for parking lots. Why do we do that? So I thought it was fortunate. People in Carmel were relatively well off compared to some places based on their educational levels. And so a lot of them had the ability to travel places in Europe and other places. Said, why can't we build our cities like that? So I started on a quest to try to figure that out. And I think again, it's important to put it in historical perspective. So at the turn of the 20th century, say 1900, we had nice cities in this country because people didn't have cars yet. They had to use public transportation. They had to develop their cities in such a way they could walk most places. Then the car comes along, and but it's important to remember, we didn't get over 50% car ownership until the conclusion of World War II. We were almost there in 1929, this thing called the Great Depression hit in October, and people didn't have the money, their cars. I think a lot of people lost their cars to the banks. Those that kept them couldn't afford to put gas in them or tires. Then the war came, and if you remember your history, there were ration coupons. Unless you had a war purpose to drive, you weren't allowed to do so. You had to get a coupon to get gas and oil. Another important thing to remember, there hadn't been any building since October of 29 when the Great Depression hit until after World War II in August 1945. Been tremendous amounts of immigration as people fled Europe and other places that were at war. And I had a friend that he's a well-to-do guy now, lived in D.C., but he told me when he was a kid that he had 3 generations living in an 800 square foot apartment in Queens, in New York. And he said that was pretty typical back then. And because people didn't have, there just wasn't enough housing. There's a housing crisis now, but I don't think it was as bad as what they had prior to World War II. So cities were crowded. And there's also, because people were crowded together, there was a lot of disease. Antibiotics had been invented just before the war, but they hadn't figured out how to mass produce them yet. So during the war, they made what they could, but they all went to the military personnel fighting in the Pacific and European theaters, which made sense. It was only after World War II that we were able to conquer some of these diseases that penicillin was able to help with. So cities were crowded. How did we heat our cities prior to 1960? Coal. Walk around to any house in Goshen or Indianapolis or anywhere else, the northern part of the United States, you'll see a coal chute next to the driveway. They'd dump coal in, it'd be sitting down on the basement floor, and before bed, somebody would go down and load that thing up with coal. It would heat up the house, and they'd do it again in the morning when it was cold out. I remember going to Indianapolis as a little kid, I think for a music contest my dad was taking students to. And I was probably 8 or 9, asking my mom, I was like, why are my hands all black? And, what's all this black stuff in the sink? I didn't do anything to get dirty today. What was the coal dust in the air? Of course, there's health ramifications to that as well. So our cities were overcrowded. They had, antibiotics hadn't been invented, so disease was an issue. They were still dirty because of the way they were heated. And so after the war, what happened? We were the only country in the world almost, between Asia and Europe, that didn't have its industrial might destroyed. So we were resupplying the rest of the world, and the average factory worker was better off than any other working person in the history of mankind. They had money, able to buy a car, and these suburbs started to pop up on the edge of the older cities. People said, I want to get out, I want a little grass, and so that's what happened. But what we didn't do as a city, I learned, was think about the long-term consequences of traffic. If you have, anybody ever watched the movie It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart? All these themes are in that movie. Here he is helping the immigrant families get out in a nice subdivision, get away. Mayor, welcome. I feel really odd. I got three mayors in this room. You're a strong guy. It's okay. So we had this history, and there were other issues going on, of course, redlining and other things, but cities, I think it's important to understand what happened. We had designed beautiful places, beautiful cities for people to live for 3,000 or 4,000 years in this globe. And then the car comes along, and we're trying to figure out how to do it, and we made lots of mistakes. So if you're coming, you just got, like in A Wonderful Life, you just got a few little houses on the edge of town, that's fine. And we adopted that old county road grid. There's a mile grid, not what you usually do in cities, which is every 500 feet or so, about 10 roads, 10 streets per mile. Instead, he had one. So we also did something else. There was a court case back, I think, 1927, Euclid, Ohio, dealing with powers of cities to zone. There was the case was probably decided right, but there were some unintended consequences. That is, that you could segregate uses. You put all the houses over here, all the factories over there, which made sense when the factories had a lot of noxious fumes coming out of them. Everything was divided. So what's that mean for our town? It means you got to drive from place to place all day. We used to be able, because we had mixed use zoning, where you might have housing and stores all in the same building or in the same block. Go to a zoning hearing today and suggest you want to put up a store in the middle of the subdivision. See how that goes. Did you try that when you were mayor? Yeah. so those were the conditions. I think it's important to understand how we got where we got. So my job in Carmel, all these people said they wanted a traditional city like Goshen, like Elkhart, where you could walk places, narrow lots. You know, we had narrow lots, 45-foot lots for most houses, 50-foot lots back then. Why? Because they were much wider. You had to walk so far to go anywhere. You had to walk past double the number of houses, had to walk twice as far. Lots only got big after we had cars. And so it's what we tried to do in Carmel is then figure out how to still accommodate cars, but yet start designing for people, not cars. Our cities, we knew, needed to be for people, not cars. But anyway, we were basically tasked with building a new city because there was no downtown in our city. It was a bunch of nice subdivisions, good public school, and a good library. So, figure out this equipment here. You can't, I stepped to the back and realized you can't see this. I'm going to brag a little because we won some awards. The first line up there, 2023, we were named the best small city to live in the United States by a group called Wallet Hub. 2023, best place to live in Indiana by Niche Magazine. 2022, best place to live in Indiana by Niche Magazine. 2022, best place to raise a family in Indiana. 2022, another recognition, best for the public schools, best public schools in Indiana. 2022, Money Magazine, owned by CNN, best place to retire in the United States of America. 2022, most caring city in Indiana from another company. And of course, we know these companies are trying to just drive, with these contests, drive business to their websites. But as mayor, you run with these things. But we did get a lot of recognition. Safest city to raise a child in America, 2020. Best suburbs, number 4, 2020. Best suburbs to live in America. We got a lot of these, and it was because of the work of our staff, and we worked really hard. Best holiday market in the U.S., it says on this list, 2021, but we've actually gotten that 5 years in a row. How many of you have been down to our Christmas market? Okay, good. We had 500,000 people come last year. It's only 5 years old with a year off for the pandemic. So, this is not Carmel, Indiana. Anybody know where that is? It's San Diego from Coronado Island. You know, you can see the palm trees and the sunny skies, the mountains, the ocean. You know it's 72 degrees because it's always 72 degrees in San Diego. This, too, is not, that's Aspen Mountain, actually. That is also not Carmel, Indiana. That, too, is not Carmel, Indiana. This, on the other hand, is our palette. This is what we had to work with. No water, no mountains, and lousy weather half the year. But that's what we had to work with. And then I would say we can do it because they had the same set of conditions. Lousy weather and no mountains and no oceans. And they figured out how to build a pretty nice city a long time ago. And I went through this with a lot of neighborhood groups and town halls because I wanted people to think outside the box. I wanted them to think big. I wanted them to think we can do this and we can do it really well because that's how we're going to compete here in Indiana because we don't have those. I didn't have the St. Joe River either or the Elkhart River to deal with. You have a little kind of a river on the far east side of Carmel, but not in downtown Carmel. We had kind of had some swampy land, like where the city center is now. It was about it. We had no natural amenities. Of course, there we are. This is important. This is basically a map of the city, but what I want to point out, you see the Monon Trail, which is a rail-to-trail project. Monon was a rail line that went from near Chicago. It was actually during the Civil War to take meat from the Chicago stockyards to the troops, the Yankee troops fighting in the South. But you see US 31 on the left, and you see what used to be State Road 431 on the right, which is now a local road. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And then you can see the outer loop of Indianapolis 465 just barely comes into Carmel at the south end. But we had those three parts of Carmel divided by those big highways. And in many ways, they initially were like the Great Wall of China. They just divided into three separate places. You couldn't cross on a bicycle or a pedestrian. That's not the case today, but it was when I took office. Now, this is interesting. I want to talk just a little bit about walkability and how we do things. This slide made me laugh. Look at it carefully. What are these guys doing? They're paying money to go up to this business and get on a Stairmaster. But they take the escalator to get there when they could save the $20 a month and just walk up and down the stairs outside. But that's the way we think about walking. You know, I caught myself the other day. I was in a shopping center, and I had to. It was like a big. There was outlots, and I finished business at one store. I was going to go to another one. I started to get in my car to drive like 300 yards. I thought, wait a minute, what am I doing? But we think like that in this country. We don't think about building cities where people can walk most places. And then we're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars on building roads because we're driving 10 to 15 times more every day than we would if we had designed our cities differently. The average American last year spent 2 hours a day in their automobile. Think about that. And that's an average. So that means, and that includes all the people in New York and Washington, maybe downtown Chicago, that don't, in Miami probably, that don't drive, that walk to work. And so that's the average. There are also people driving more than 2 hours a day. What kind of quality of life is that? That's what we built. Dave Weaver has a great slide. I want to steal that slide, Dave. It raises the questions like, the kids are complaining. Parents say we never go outside anymore. And then he pops up a picture of your typical urban sprawl and said, "This is what they did outside for us." Nobody wants to spend time in it. But anybody want to go for a romantic walk on the edge of that parking lot? Probably not. Then there's that. They did plant a few trees in those parking lots, but how could you navigate that as a pedestrian? You only go there by car. Same thing there. Highway off to the left, highway on three of the sides. You can't walk to that place. And then there's that. That's probably about $200 million of concrete in engineering, and every 35 or 40 years it's going to have to all be rebuilt. So is that a good financial decision? No, it was not. And if you drive through that, how do you think your day's going? Probably increases stress levels a bit. Then there's that. I'd like to talk to the engineer that came up with that. Then there's this one. So all those houses look pretty much alike. Can't walk to anywhere you need to go. You can go out for a walk, I guess, around that neighborhood. First of all, it's in the desert. But no stores, no mixed use. So everybody that lives there has to drive, presumably, some distance for anything they're going to do. Then there's that. That is a real slide. Maybe you're supposed to turn right, and dodge the rest of the I don't know. But we have not done a good job of designing our transportation systems. So this is downtown Carmel. That was at our International Arts Fair, which, by the way, is coming up in 2 weeks. Anybody wants to come to Central Indiana. We started that in 1997, and it has grown. But so we had this little... So Carmel is 50 square miles. That happens to be double the land mass of the island of Manhattan. So it's a big area. So we had this little 2 or 3 block downtown. You can see the end of it there with the building with the turret at the end. So we knew that wasn't big enough to be a downtown. It was empty for the most part, but we turned it into specialty retail. We put up the arches, named it the Art and Design District. We didn't have any art and design businesses at the time, not one. But because we said we wanted them, today we have over 100. We built a design center I'll talk about in a minute, but people said, okay, let's all be in the same place. It makes sense. The city did master lease half a dozen retail spaces, and it didn't cost very much. You know, if the rents are $40 a square foot, we might rent them for $40 a square foot and release them for $20 a square foot, so you can get some good art galleries that can't afford to be there otherwise. But that creates all this other business in the area. This was not always a trail. That's the Monon Trail going through downtown Carmel. It was an abandoned rail line. We had to start eminent domain proceedings on 246 parcels to get it back. It was not an easy process. There was a class action lawsuit. Any lawyers in the room? Class action lawsuit between the train company and the adjoining landowners fighting over who owned it based on the deeds that had been done back in the 1860s and 70s. So it was a mess. We got it back. It took a lot of time and a lot of effort. So that was we'd already put up the antique-looking streetlights at the top when we thought it might be a good idea, and torn down one of the buildings to get a before picture. That's my biggest regret. We didn't have enough before pictures, but you get a sense of what downtown Carmel looked like. It's buildings like that. And then we did public-private partnerships. The city would buy the land, and in the beginning we'd discount the land to get people to invest in it, because the answer I was getting from most developers, well, that'll never work. Suburbs don't have downtowns. They needed the taxpayers to say, we really want this and guarantee it. We don't do that now, but we did it in the beginning. We had to give away a lot in the beginning to get it started. But here's a 3-story building. We actually grabbed the big brick patterns on the Carnegie Library and duplicated them. So this is a brand new, well, not anymore, it's a brand new building. It was built in 1997 and 98, but a new building for that. It was our first redevelopment project in downtown Carmel. This redevelopment commission bought the land, basically did an RFP, said what we wanted, and finally convinced the developer to do it. That's half a block off the center of the old town. It was, you can see, an old grocery store. It turned into a liquor store, an abandoned building to the left. We replaced it with the Indiana Design Center. And you notice that it's brought up to the street because we know that pedestrians feel more comfortable when there's a building up on the street and the parking is somewhere else. And actually, if there's a line of cars parked along the street, we've learned there's a lot of academic data about this. The sociologists have studied it. There's cars on one side and building on another. They're wide open parking lots. People don't use it because they don't feel comfortable. It's a psychological thing, I think. But that's the Indiana Design Center. We actually put about 100 spaces underground in that building, even though the building's privately owned, the parking lot's owned by the city. It's hard to do, but I have any idea what one underground parking space cost? $80,000 a space today. It might be a little bit more. That was a couple of years ago. An above ground structural garage is $40,000 a space. A surface lot's probably $10,000 to $12,000 a space to build. So parking is really expensive. Providing infrastructure for our cars is really expensive. And I didn't know that before I was mayor. So how does the city pay for that? Well, we used a method called tax incremental finance. The acronym is TIF. And TIF, like any tool, just like a hammer can be used to beat somebody or it can be used to build something beautiful. TIF can be used and misused, but we used it. So what it is, you set a base year. Say we're getting X amount of taxes in that year, and it's going to go up 20 times. Well, you take a loan based on that anticipated property tax revenue and use that to build the underground garage at $80,000 a space. You think, was that a good deal for the taxpayers? It is, too, because it's important to remember The property tax is paid on a square foot basis. So we have one 9-acre site in Carmel now. It's about to be redeveloped. It was a 1950s retail strip center. 85% of the lot was service parking. 9 acres is a lot, probably 7.5 acres that was a parking lot. Just like those pictures. We were getting $60,000 a year of property tax on that 9-acre site. When it's redeveloped at 5 stories, it'll go up to $3 million a year. So if we take 80% of that, use it, to say $2.4 million of that goes to amortize that TIF bond, make those payments for the next 25 years. Okay, what do we have left? Well, let's see. Now we're getting $600,000 a year versus 60. So it's still a good deal. Plus, we've done something really nice on that site for people. Because when you do that sort of deal with a developer, you can also say, Mrs. Developer or Mr. Developer, we want really good architecture. We don't want bad-looking architecture. We want some beautiful public sidewalks. We want some public art on that sidewalk. You can horse trade a little bit, and that's what we did. So that's how TIF works. And basically, most of downtown Carmel, that's how it was built. So there was a before picture up on the left of Main Street in Carmel. That's the same area today, 25 years later. The tall building, the 5-story building, French Second Empire style, has a 2-level parking garage underneath it. In the middle, it has that plaza, a European style plaza where it's a public park basically in the middle of that building. There's 2 big archways you can walk under it, and it's used all the time. People not only people living in that building, people stop in at the coffee shop and get their coffee and go drink it by the fountain. We had some chessboards out on tables, and I see people playing chess and checkers all the time, different times of the day. But we paid for that with TIF. There's some of our public art. We spend 1%. I always thought I could justify to the public that we would spend 1% of our revenues on support for the arts. $1, 1 penny out of every dollar. Some people would say to me, well, what about all the poor people that need to eat? My response to that was always, where'd you go on vacation last year? And they'd tell me, because usually this is a well-off person asking that question. They'd tell me, and I said, poor people can't go there. They can't go to Florida. They can't go to a Caribbean island. They can't go to California or Europe, wherever. But don't they have a right to live in a beautiful place? We need to make our own city beautiful as it inspires people and makes people feel good about where they live. So we spent a lot of money on public art. We spent a lot of money supporting arts organizations. But it's been the driver of our economic development. Indianapolis had taken the theory years ago. I mean, you've all seen the big stadiums they built. They started off by attracting in the 70s and 80s all the governing organizations like NCAA and, the Rowing Association and this National Swimming Association, the Olympic governing organizations. And then they moved to the professional sports teams. Well, because of that, they had of course, it's my background too. So I understood it, but they'd invest in the arts for a city, a metro area like Indianapolis. So I thought this would be a nice niche for us. We did a lot of street art. We did fun art that people could interact with. There's downtown Carmel today, the original Arts and Design District. See, it's not very big. The street's narrow. We mix the new buildings in with the old ones. About 2/3 of those are new buildings. The other ones are old, and it's not that easy to tell which is which, is it? It's important, I think, when we did our TIF deals, we always had an architect either on staff or a consulting architect we hired to, try to make sure that we got good architecture for the community. Went through a period of time in this country, and I think some cities are still there, where government should be totally separate from business. I always disagree. I think, these are our cities. We have the right to say we want them developed in a particular way, to create value, to be a good place to live. a place where everybody from whatever background can thrive and prosper. There's some of the detail. Those are new buildings. Of course, we used architectural styles in the past. There you see where people are eating outside. Those were parking spaces at one point, parallel parking spaces. We took a few parking spaces away and made the sidewalk wider and put tables on them. And we didn't push the tables up to the stores. We pushed them back to create more mixing of pedestrians and the people actually eating. You can see our art and design logo. We did a logo. Didn't do banners because they get ruined by the sun every 6 weeks. Banner salesmen have it great because they can keep selling cities those things over and over again. But we use metal. We put those metal logos. They last for about 20 years before the sun fades them. But we wanted people to know when they're there, they're actually there. And this is interesting. Oops, we're out of order. I'm sorry. So what did I do here? Hang on. Get back to where it was. Sorry. So this is interesting. I think a lot of people in this country are concerned about climate, changing weather, and it's interesting. As a Republican, it used to be kind of a Republican issue, and hasn't been lately. I always pointed out it was Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican, who set up our national parks. It was President Eisenhower who set up the Arctic Reserve, also a Republican. It was Nixon, and then later Ford, that started the EPA. Secretary Rosehouse was the first EPA commissioner from Indiana. It was George Bush Sr. that set up the protocols to start to measure climate change. It was Reagan, along with Margaret Thatcher, who had a scientific background. Remember we had the ozone hole in the southern hemisphere, and we were afraid that one would start in the northern hemisphere, and they convened the world's nations in Montreal and signed the Montreal protocols. So my theory has always been this is, I haven't met a Republican or a Democrat yet that wanted their family to drink dirty water or breathe dirty air. So I always saw this as a nonpartisan issue we should always be working on. But this is interesting. This is Chicago. And if you look at it, the orange, of course, is where the most energy and the most pollution is being generated. On the left, you see how the suburbs are blue, not nearly as much carbon and heat. But when you look to the right, that's calculated differently. You know the old thing, statistics can mislead if you don't look at both sides? On the right, that's a per capita analysis of the amount of carbon being put off and the amount of heat being put off. And even though there's a lot more in downtown Chicago, on a per capita basis, it's much, much less where people are able to walk places. Well, this goes back to what I was talking about, the TIF. I want to review it one more time. If you look at the gray blob on option A on the left, there's a 10,000 square foot building with a 30,000 square foot parking lot. So 10,000 square feet times $2 a square foot property tax rate equals $20,000 on the left. On the right, 5-story building, 200,000 square feet with underground parking. That takes the property tax if you do the math, from $20,000 to $400,000. Now, you think, okay, the mayor just wants all this money to do things with. Well, it's money that can help the community, that can provide a social safety net so we can afford to do the things that people need. And that's just the revenue side. Anybody have any idea how much a 2-lane road costs per mile? Mayors are not eligible to answer this question. You either. You don't get to answer either, David. About $12 million a mile for a 2-lane road, not a 4-lane road. That's a nice road with curbs, underground sewer, probably sidewalks or bike path along the side. But $12 million a mile. So you only have so much investment in every community. There's only so many people that are going to developing your community. So does the city have all this investment spread out, which means they may have to build 10 times the amount of roads if it's spread out as opposed to condensed in a downtown like Goshen's traditional historical downtown? There's another example. These are both Carmel. That's one of our projects on the left, the one I'd shown you before, Sophia Square, 5 stories on basically 2 acres, and that's our Meyer store. Do you have Meyer up? Yeah, you have a Meyer in South Bend, I think. Yeah, it's our Meyer store in Carmel, which was built before I was mayor, on 26 acres. So the assessed value per acre, Sophia Square, is just under $25 million. The assessed value, and that's per acre. The assessed value of the Meyer store, because most of its parking lot, is $500,000 per acre. So we have to run roads past all that distance, and we have to police it and provide fire, and then there's water pipes, and sanitary sewer pipes, and stormwater drainage. So as we sprawl out, not only does the revenue go down a lot, the expenses go way up. So cities, what I learned is that cities that don't at least have a downtown core with several stories are going to be financially in trouble into perpetuity. Cities will never go bankrupt. They've always got next year's taxes. But they'll be insolvent. They won't be able to pay their bills. And worse, they're not going to be able to provide the type of services that people deserve and want. I like this slide because Fisher's is our next door neighbor. There might be a little bit of competition there from time to time. And so they have a Top Golf and an IKEA on 50 acres. Their assessed value per acre is $1 million. That same building we just showed you in Carmel on 2 acres, the assessed value is just under $25 million an acre. So they had to run roads and infrastructure, and they have to police it. And I see a couple fire chiefs in this room, and a fire station calls with professional firefighters $3 or $4 million plus, an EMS to staff 24/7, 7 days a week. So if you're spread out, instead of 3 stations, you might need 6 for the same amount of assessed value. And so many times cities haven't done the math and figured out whether their zoning decisions make any financial sense 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line. So I told you that little downtown area that I've been showing you pictures of wasn't big enough to be our downtown because we're on 50 acres, double the size of the island of Manhattan. So we went about 6 blocks south, starting in we closed on the first, I remember the date. The day I died, it was December 19th, 1997. We closed on the first piece of parcel, what ended up being our 90-acre development, which became our new downtown, our new master planned downtown. That's what it looked like. This was an abandoned Kroger store. And you can see big parking lots. All that was just empty land. We'd actually started to put this street in over at this side. You can see it's under construction. That didn't exist to get people to this area. We master planned that downtown. If you've been to our Chris Kindle Mark or the concert hall, it's right in the middle of that picture. But that's what it looked like in about 1997. And there you see that. Oops, go back one. Oops. Picture up in the left, that insert, that's what the Kroger left for us when they moved across the street, and that shopping center, which was owned by somebody else, not Kroger, went into foreclosure. There it is, a different view. You can see old industrial buildings. That's about 3 or 4 years into the project, probably about 2000, because that reflecting pool in the top right corner was part of the project. You can see the road going off to the right, top right is now in place. That wasn't there when we started. But we still hadn't started the city center development. So that was our first project. We didn't have any water, as I mentioned, in downtown Carmel, so we built this reflecting pool just a place had some water. People like water. That's an apartment building you're looking at. That's one of the other apartment buildings, the picture on the top right with underground parking in it, again, using the tax revenue, a portion of the tax revenue to pay for the underground parking. See, we moved the buildings up on the street in the traditional way that downtown Goshen was built in the 1890s and 80s. The townhomes, that was part of the project. They're fed from the rear. The garages are in the rear off the street. Remember when we did that, there'd never been any townhomes built in Carmel before at that time. And they can't build them fast enough now, but the realtors all thought I was crazy, so people never buy a townhome. They just want single-family homes in a suburb. Of course, the developer told me he thought he would sell out. It'd take 2 years to sell out. He did it in 47 days. So it's about having options for people. People say, you know, it's not that we're against single-family neighborhoods. I live in one. But what business does government have telling people they have to live in a single-family subdivision? They can't. We want you to move here, but you can't live in an apartment. You can't live in a condo. You can't live in a townhome. It's about having options so people actually have choices. There's our city center today. We were fortunate to have really good development partners on this. Underground parking under a large portion of it. We created these plazas and squares where people can gather, have events and festivities. Almost all these retailers are constantly, rarely do we have an empty retail space. And it's not empty for very long. There's more pictures. There you can see one of our streets. The street on the bottom is actually on top of an underground parking structure. You can see the concert hall in the distance. We put the top right's our Veterans Memorial looking out at the reflecting pool with all the various service flags. You can see the detailed architecture. I have this theory that architecture got uninteresting about the time we all got in cars and quit walking around looking at it. I see I'm talking a long time here, so I'll try to move along. It's a problem when you give a mayor or even a former mayor a microphone. There's our farmers market on Saturday morning. Of course, that's where the Chris Kindle Mark is in the winter. We'll have 4,000 to 5,000 people every Saturday in this area that we master plan for our new downtown. It's important to have events in downtowns to support the businesses that have made the decision to locate there. You've got to support them. The city needs to support them by having event after event after event. Office buildings, that's the PEGCOR National Headquarters. There's 5 of those buildings they built in our city center. But you see how we made the underground parking very subtle, so you barely even see it unless you know it's there. We accommodate the cars, but we don't design for them. There's our concert hall. We look to the past for that one. The picture in the top right was built in the 1530s in Vicenza, Italy, outside of Venice, by a famous Italian Renaissance. You ever heard of Palladian windows? The rounded top windows. This was Antonio Palladio that was the architect of that building. It was a private house. It was like people buying big houses up at Wawasee today. You know, Venice was sort of a swamp, especially back in the 1500s. A lot of mosquitoes, I imagine, in the summer, and so the wealthy people went 20, 30 miles outside of Venice in the hills in the summer and get away from the heat, and that's what they built. There's the inside of our concert hall. I always believed that it's a concert hall, not a theater. We don't have a proscenium arch, don't have a curtains meant for music. We had 2 small theaters in the complex as well. But the public architecture ought to inspire. It ought to be architecture that makes people feel proud of the place they live. That's out in front of the Palladium, and that building, which faces it, that's where the 2 small theaters are. But that hides a 900-space parking garage that's faced on 3 sides with buildings, so you don't know it's a parking garage. But there's 2 theaters, several private offices, and so people park, get on the side street, they go to the back, they park, they walk through the lobby to come to this area. There it is at Christmas. If you haven't been down lately, we have a new light show that goes every night now. Great light show on the Palladium, and they switch off different themes from time to time. This is interesting. So that was our Monon project. So we had, you see in the top, you see our city center project, and this drone picture was taken right above the Art and Design District, the old downtown that we turned into the Art and Design District. And in between those 2 areas, we had a lot of old industrial buildings that were for the most part abandoned. And so we put together a plan to connect the 2 redevelopment districts. And I thought this would happen about the time I died. But we had so much momentum going at that point. It happened in just a few years' time. We have, let me go through the streetscape there. See the big gray path in the middle? That's the Monon Trail for bicycles. We had so much traffic on it in this area, so many people ride bikes. We built another 250 miles of trails so that every neighborhood in Carmel from all 50 square miles can ride their bike or walk to downtown if they want to. And we've made the street infrastructure so it's safe to do so now. From about 98% of the city, we still have a few little places to fix. And we have people moving to Carmel because they like to bicycle. It's become a huge economic advantage for us. But we wanted to make this a pedestrian area, so the streets, I'm looking at the fire chiefs now, are 9 feet wide. But you can access all those buildings in the streets on either side. And we had an interesting discussion with our fire department about 2 years ago on another project. And they said, we want a street along the Monon. I said, well, we don't want a street along the Monon. We want the buildings to face the trail. Well, if there's a fire in one of those buildings, we'd have to drive on the trail. And I said, Chief, he said, that street costs $12 million a mile. The trail costs about $150,000 a mile. Drive on the trail once in the next 50 years when you have to, if you have to, and we'll be happy to fix the trail afterwards. And he said, oh, I never thought of it like that. But you have to have those conversations to get people out of the way that, he was doing what he was supposed to do. He was making sure there was a building there they could get there, which is absolutely what the fire chief ought to be thinking about. But I said, you got to look at it in a big picture, and we don't need to build streets necessarily with your equipment. There are other solutions that are more economical and just as safe. You have to make sure it's safe, but maybe not the way we've always done it. So anyway, those streets, we don't even have speed limit signs on those streets because they're so narrow, nobody speeds. Nobody can really go more than about 20 miles an hour. But that's because they're filled with pedestrians most of the time. Cars are, there's people walking out on those streets all the time. You drive through there, you're not going anywhere fast, and drivers know that. It's a pedestrian way that accommodates cars. It's built for people. You can drive there if you need to, drop somebody off that may be handicapped, or it happens to be January and 30 below, okay. But most of the time, you don't see much traffic on it. There's some of our publics. Anybody remember who Lech Walesa was? The Polish guy, yeah, that basically freed Poland from communism, head of the electrical workers union. And he had a buddy that kept making sculptures that talked about freedom and freedom of the press and freedom of speech and freedom of association. And the communists thought that was criminal and put him in jail, and so he shared a cell with Lech Walesa. He now lives in St. Louis and done a crucifix for one of the Catholic churches in Carmel, and the priest called me, a friend of mine, and said, this guy is really a hero, and he's old and doesn't have any money and living in St. Louis, and you're doing all this artwork, why don't you commission something from him? So this Victor Scala that was Lech Walesa's buddy, did that sculpture for us. We put up a plaque telling his history of fighting for freedom in Poland, too. It's kind of a neat thing. But that shows you we're still waiting on the building on the left, but see, that's the Monon Trail for bikes. Off to the left or to the right there is a pedestrian side, and then the street where the cars are parked. There you can see it as well. We put a lot of money into landscaping this to make it beautiful. There's another public sculpture there in the background. We have electrical counter there. You can really see it. That's Midtown Plaza, too. Has big screen TV, selfie station, chairs, ping pong tables, outdoor ping pong tables and pool tables, adult swings, a stage, so we have little events there. This plaza is busy almost 24/7 with people. It's not too big. It's important not to make we learn spaces too big. People don't feel comfortable in them. But that picture is unusual. In fact, there's not as many people there as usual. Some days we had to replace the grass in the middle with artificial turf, so we couldn't keep the grass alive. It was so used. bike share. There's our trike bikes for elderly people and others. Bike shares are really important for a city. Companies will do it for you. It's all app-based. I think we did 6,000 rentals last year with our bike share. People come to town. They're staying in one of the hotels. They can use the bike share. They can use the bike system. I have one consultant that comes in from New York City. He Ubers from the airport to Carmel because when he gets there, he just likes to walk and use his bike. Roundabouts. You knew that I could not talk. Anybody's been to Carmel? Yes, we do have more roundabouts than anybody in the United States of America, probably the world. We have 157 roundabouts today, and we're down to 5 stoplights. Why did we do that? Number one, because of safety. Anybody in this crowd ever speed up to go through a yellow light? Never mind. I never have, right? You've never have you, Dave? Didn't think so. We all do. We all know that we do. And so we also know that the human error rate rarely changes. It's like, 2 or 3 accidents per 100,000 cars. So if you have an intersection with 50,000 cars, it's mean 1 to 2 accidents every couple of days. If you have an intersection with 20,000 cars a day, maybe every 5 days you have a couple accidents. The question is, what type of accident is that going to be? Is that going to be a high-speed accident for somebody that sped up to go through that yellow light or go through the green light before it turns yellow or pink light, whatever it might be? Secondly, the cost. Anybody have any idea what a stoplight costs today? Yes, sir. How much? About 500,000, 400 to 500,000. Yeah. And I'm told in hurricane-prone areas in the south, it's double that. They have to make them stronger. And then when cars are stopped burning gas, they put out a lot of pollution, waste a lot of money. Some people thought the roundabouts were good just because they saved tons of carbon. Then there were the climate deniers. It wasn't important. But then we had our city engineer do the math. They figured out everybody that drove about the average amount in Carmel every year saved about $300 in gas, not idling at stoplights. And so the guys that didn't believe in climate science, they were happy too. We angle ins and outs very carefully. People said, well, they're not good for pedestrians. You don't have a crosswalk. A lot of people get killed at stoplight crosswalks every year. Indianapolis had dozens last year. We had one bicyclist killed at 85-year-old was killed at near a roundabout last year. But since we started the program in 96, that was the first pedestrian, even though he was on a bicycle. He was 85, and the kid that hit him was 16 and had his license for 3 days. It was a tragedy. But that's the only fatality we've had of a pedestrian at a roundabout. We have hundreds of pedestrians crossing those roundabouts every year. It's all about speed. When somebody makes a mistake and you're going 15 or 20 instead of 50, you have time to react. And if somebody does get hit, this is a chart I was looking for. This is a great chart. So see the green and the red up at the top, or the bottom at 40 miles an hour, 1 out of 10 pedestrians will survive being hit by a car. At 30 miles an hour, half of them will survive. At 20 miles an hour, 9 out of 10 will survive. If you go down to 15 or 10, almost everybody survives. It's not pleasant, but you survive. And so it's much safer. And our data has continued to bear that out year after year after year. So how do you get people to walk in a downtown? You have to have a reason to walk, more than just going out to walk the dog around your neighborhood. I need a loaf of bread. I'm going to walk down to the corner store. I need to walk over to the school. And so if we mix uses up as opposed to segregating uses, our cities, people don't drive as much. The taxpayers save millions of dollars in having fewer roads and less wear and tear in their roads. It's got to be a comfortable walk, easy to walk, not scary. And it's got to be an interesting walk. In other words, who goes for a walk past the Walmart parking lot or the Meijer parking lot or the Target parking lot? I shouldn't just pick on Walmart. I keep thinking, I look at that picture on the left, I think if somebody had a drink Would they even get the right house? And they probably don't know their neighbors. This was called snub-nosed garages. They stick out towards the street. You pull your car in. There's no place to walk to that you need to go. And you probably know your neighbors on either side, maybe across the street, and that's about it. So you're not walking along the street to go somewhere and get to talk to people sitting on their front porch like my grandparents used to do at 220 South 7th. They'd sit out there. They didn't have air conditioning, of course, in the 60s. They'd sit out there, and all the neighbors walk by. They'd stop on the porch and have iced tea, and it was social. I met all their neighbors as a little kid sitting on that front porch. Why don't we build our cities like that today? And look at that. Is that really the way you want to spend your life? Now we know why cars are so fancy today, because people live in them for 2 hours every day or more. That says it itself. One-way streets are terrible because it encourages cars to speed up. You don't lose any lane capacity if you turn them into two-way streets. You have the same number of lanes, but you don't have these speedways. If I had a city that had a bunch of one-way streets, that'd be the first thing I'd do, is turn them into two-way streets again, because it makes pedestrians feel more comfortable. Now I want to know who did that. So if you're a cyclist, of course, you have to get off your bike and walk around and manage to not being hit by the traffic. It's like we just don't think the right way sometimes. Think about what we're doing. There's a before and after. The before was a lot better. I don't know where that was. I think somewhere. So this is Carmel on the bottom picture on Keystone Parkway looking north, and that is Keystone Parkway looking south into Indianapolis. Mayor of Indianapolis doesn't like this slide either. But we prohibited all off-premise signs, in other words, not on the building or in front of the building. In other words, billboards. No billboards in Carmel. When I became mayor, we had 11 grandfather billboards. Today they're all gone because we wouldn't let them repair them. They need to be repainted. Nope, can't repaint it. So they all got taken down. But what street would you rather drive on? Of course, the picture on the bottom, I guess, was a sunny day, and the picture above wasn't. But and that's not bad. We've seen places with a lot worse sign sprawl than that. McDonald's wants one that's 100 feet tall, and then Burger King wants 120 feet, and Wendy's wants 135 feet, and then McDonald's comes back and wants to be the taller again. And after a while, you got just ugly. Our cities do not have to be ugly. As residents and business owners and taxpayers, we can say we don't want to build any more ugly things in our cities. So, I thought you might enjoy. So the local paper had a lot of fun, Kern and Carmel, with roundabouts. What is it? Newly discovered molecular structure? B, a decorative tile pattern for your bathroom. C, a street map of Carmel. There's some of our roundabouts. I got to tell you a quick story. The roundabout in the bottom. I get an email about 15 years ago, or 10 years ago now. I'm sitting in the office. It's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and this guy emails me and says, I'm writing to you from London, England, and I am head of the British Roundabout Appreciation Society. So I kind of chuck on it. I thought, okay. He said, would you call me sometime? So I look at my watch, 1 o'clock. It's about 5, 6 o'clock over there. I call him. David Beresford, his name. And introduced myself. I was hoping you'd call today. He just sent the email. And he said, we're actually having a meeting of the British Roundabout Appreciation Society. And I lived in England for a little period of time when I was in grad school, and I heard noise in the background. I said, are you meeting in a pub? I think I hear pub noise. He said, where else would we meet? We're British. I said, how many of you are in the Roundabout Appreciation Society? He said, well, there's 5 here tonight. Sometimes we get 6 or 7. It's a bunch of old guys. And he said, what we do, we put out a calendar every year, the world's most beautiful roundabouts. We'd like for you to submit some photography. So we did. I knew what was coming. Would you like to buy some calendars? So we bought $10,000 worth of calendars, which we used in swag bags for the entire year. But they made that roundabout on the bottom, the roundabout of the year, put it on the cover, also put it in for December. So we went with it. We put up a big plaque. The neighbors love it. They roundabout of the year for 2009 or something. It was a good story. Oh, I never thought it was quite that fat, but you see I'm holding the NCE brackets. That's when the NCE brackets were coming out upside down. It says, I don't know which one of you idiots left this stupid street plan on my desk, but hello, there aren't any roundabouts. Apparently the editorial cartoonist for the local paper thought that was funny. This is interesting, and this is data, and I hate to show data, and I realize the TVs aren't very big, so let me just run through it fast. This is where we, on a per capita basis, look at the percentage. So if a city's 50,000, we double it to 100,000. If it's 25,000, we quadruple it to, and do the math, and then look at personal injury accidents for Carmel and other cities. Here you can see Carmel is averaging 0.2 accidents. Back then we had 140 roundabouts. This is in 23. 0.2 accidents per 100,000. Westfield, with the second highest number of roundabouts in the state, is just behind us at 0.3. Then we go down to Indianapolis with virtually no roundabouts. They say they have 15, but they're basically in industrial parks. 0.77. Go to Mishawaka, 0.9. Fort Wayne, 1.05 times the number of accidents we're having. You go to Bloomington, same as Fort Wayne base. Go to South Bend, 1.16. Evansville, 1.41. That would be almost 7 times, almost 6.5 times the number of accidents per population that we have. And then this is fatalities. This is a sobering one. So you see the years on the left from 2004 through 2022. In 2004, we had 3.135 per 100,000. By 2022, we got it down to 2.4. Fisher's at 4.9. Westfield at 7.0. Then you go down to Valparaiso, 22.8 fatalities per 100,000 that year. Columbus is right behind them at 19. So Valparaiso, the other end of the scale, 22 versus 2. And it's because of the way they've designed their roads. So we know that, say, the national average is 12 per 100,000. So we're at 1/6 the national average of fatalities every year. I need to update that to 2023. It actually went down again to about 2.1. So compared to the national average, about 10 people, we don't know who they are, of course, but there's about 10 people alive every year that wouldn't be if we hadn't done it roundabouts in Carmel. So safety, number 1. Oh, that was a good one. That was Halloween. I'm being scared by a stop sign. So we had a state road dividing the east side and the central side of Carmel. There you see what it looked like in the lower left-hand section. No crosswalks. The state would only give our cars about 15 seconds to get across, and it'd be another 5 minutes before the light switched again. They were concerned. DOTs are like the state departments of transportation. So Mitch Daniels is governor, and they wanted to add lanes. All they're doing is building a bigger parking lot to get more cars through the green cycle of the light. Roundabouts move 50% more. Just a surface roundabout moves more than 50%. So we actually put road on street diet. We go from 5 lanes to 2 lanes, and you still get from point A to point B in the same or less time. But in this case, it was going to really destroy some old neighborhoods. So I went to the DOT and said, no, we won't do that. So I was knowing Mitch Daniels since 1970s when we were kids, and I went to him. He was in grad school and I was in college. And I went to him and said, Mitch, your guys aren't doing the right thing here. And I showed it to him. And at one point, the number 2 NDOT guy said to Mitch in a meeting we had, I don't think Hoosiers are smart enough to figure out how to drive through these roundabouts. Mitch, all 5'2" of him, stands up and screams at the guy, so you're calling me stupid? At that point, he arranged for us to get the road in perpetuity. And since the state was never going to have to maintain it again, we got a $110 million check to do what you see here, which is take 6 intersections. Didn't pay for all of it, but it paid for about 80% of it. Took 6 Later, we did one more. We did 96, our border street with Indianapolis. So in the end, finally 7 intersections where we separated the grade. And you don't have to, in a stoplight situation, you have to keep pulling the stoplights farther apart over the main line or over the main road because of the queuing distance between those 2 stoplights based on your traffic volumes. Roundabouts work so much better, you don't have to separate them like that. So if we'd even done what's called a tight diamond, like an interstate interchange, we would have taken 47 houses. We only had to take 3 to do this. And I was all worried about taking these houses. And the day we announced the project, I got calls from all 3 of the owners saying, how fast can you close? We all bought on this road, and it was low country lane, and we thought we'd never be able to sell our house. They couldn't wait. So that anticipated problem never materialized. There's more of our roundabouts. We also think it's important to put boulevards in. Plant trees. We have a huge street tree planting program to create a canopy. Not only is it good for the environment, we spend tens of millions of dollars in our streets every year in our cities. You spend just 2 or 3% more, you can make them beautiful, and it enhances property values. It makes people feel better about where they live. There's some of our public art. That was done by a local sculptor. Anybody know the song Stardust by Hoagie Carmichael? Hoagie Carmichael from Bloomington, Indiana, the most recorded song ever. I'll bet you've got it over here on a 33 1/3 somewhere. Most recorded song ever. But that homage to Hoagie. You see the stars and the moons coming out of the old Victrola? Stardust. There's some of the same artist work. But roundabouts are great places to put public art, too. Again, to make the city beautiful, since we don't have any mountains or oceans. We had a car corridor. I was afraid all these car dealers would leave someday, so we did these antique cars of Indiana. We couldn't do contemporary ones. There's about 30 car dealers. They'd all fight or wish one. So we commissioned 4 of them. Number 4 goes in tomorrow. So I'm anxious to get back to Carmel and see it. But that's the Marmon, the one that won the first 500 in 1911. It lights up at night. It's beautiful. That's the... which one is that? That is the Auburn, from Auburn, Indiana. That's their hood ornament. That's the stylized Studebaker S from South Bend in the 1950s and 60s. That was their logo. There's the Auburn. You can see it better. That's our newest project. There you see the parking structure, then surrounded by building. The lower left, you see what it was like. That was the main corner in the old Art and Design District, the 1960s bank building with a parking lot. It was a parking lot because there had been a gas station out there, so nobody wanted to develop it and deal with the tanks and the polluted soil, so the city did it. And then we got what you see there now, was just opened a few weeks ago. That's another new one. That's actually in a new redevelopment area now west of the original ones. We have a whole new plan. We're calling it the Flower District. That's a plan in an empty field. It's what we call a new neighborhood development. It had been a farm field. It was 35 acres. We have a developer that's going to do this over the next 10 years. Again, sculpture out in some of our corporate areas. What did I do? There we go. So anyway, here are the guiding principles. Mixed use. In other words, put retail underneath the housing, underneath the office buildings. Less emphasis on use zoning. Go to form-based. Focus on the form of the buildings so people feel comfortable. Pedestrian-based. Accommodate cars, but de-emphasize them. A hierarchy of buildings. The government buildings, important buildings that everybody feels some ownership of. Make them beautiful. Try to build in harmony with land and the built surroundings. Build on a human scale. We never go over 5 levels. Might have a tower that's 6, matched by a 3-story building or something, but we try to average never more than 5 levels. There's a lot of research out there about mental and physical health. So I think being able to open your window or step out in your balcony and connect with somebody and talk, have a conversation with somebody on the street, hear the street noise. Mental health issues get bad and sprawling. There's data on this. They also get bad when you go way up high in a building. Aesthetics, pay attention. People in a city have the right to demand beautiful buildings, beautiful architecture. Get the density right. and learn from 1,000 years of good city design. We've known how to do this for thousands of years. It was only after the car came along that we threw out all the rules and thought we could do better, and we made lots of mistakes. I have talked far longer than I was supposed to, but if somebody has questions, criticisms, I no longer have to say, if we missed your trash, I'm not doing that. But remember Mayor Puro? I've got to tell this joke. Remember Mayor Puro? He was mayor of my first term. It was back in the late 90s. He told a joke at a mayor's meeting one day. He said, about 3 o'clock one morning, I get a call at home. It was an elderly lady, and she said, I've been sitting looking at this street light on 8th Street since it got dark about 9 o'clock. It never came on. Can you get it fixed? He said, yeah, we'll get it fixed. Thank you for letting me know. And so the next day, they made sure the bulb got replaced. He set his alarm for 3 in the morning. Next day, called her, said, I just wanted to check to make sure it came on. I remember that from 28 years ago. I thought that was a great joke. Anybody have any questions? Yes. It's a good question. You know, we made some mistakes. I know I think about them every night before I go to sleep. I wish we'd done this way or that way, make it a little better. So no, we didn't have everything planned out. We had the basic principles figured out, but we got better at it. Because I don't think there's that many suburbs in the country, maybe 1 or 2. I don't think anybody's done it to the extent Carmel has about building a downtown in a suburban area that did not have a downtown. It just doesn't happen because it's complicated. It's hard to do. Yes, sir. One of the things I learned when I first started getting the developers to do it, most of them lived in Carmel or nearby. They wanted to build beautiful things they were proud of, and I convinced them to do mixed-use building, even though nobody had ever done one in a suburb that had worked before. And we'd say the city be behind it, and they get excited. Okay, we'll try it. They come back about 8-10 weeks later, can't do it. Why not? And they wouldn't want to tell me. Finally, I figured out it was the lenders saying no. So we decided, okay, we had some money in the Economic Development Fund. We're going to put up a tent, hold a big breakfast for all the developers. They can come and eat breakfast free on one condition. They bring their lenders, and they have to listen to me talk about how the city is behind this and is going to make sure these projects work in the beginning. We put a lot of guarantees up in the beginning, in the first 5 to 8 years. We don't do that anymore. Rarely. Hotel Carmichael, we put some guarantees behind, again, because it was the first time that had happened. We've never had to exercise any of them. It's made lots of money. But the city has to tell the community, we're going to make sure this works, the development community. That's number one. These are all partnerships that get negotiated each time. And you have to do that carefully and thoughtfully. And then you have to go out to the chambers of commerce, neighborhood associations, show people pictures, get them excited, say, we're trying to make this a beautiful city. What do you want to see in your city? And listen to them. And then show them what you're doing over and over and over. I go to faith institutions, churches, synagogues. We go to, we have 180 neighborhood associations. I think I was at every one several times talking about things. We actually set up quarterly meetings for downtown merchants because the small businesses that were in the downtown area initially felt like that maybe we're being forced out. No, we want you to be included, and here's how we can do that. So we started having information meetings because the rumor mill was so bad. Then I started having meetings just for the neighborhood association presidents, the ones that wrote the newsletters that went out to everybody in the neighborhood and tried to teach them what we were doing and why, so they could communicate it then to their residents. A lot of time was spent in communication, plus city newsletters. We had a city TV channel, of course, and we put all sorts of videos up explaining what we were doing, constant. And but I couldn't have done it if we hadn't really just communicated over and over and over again, because we were making some big changes in how suburbs were built. A lot of big changes. Any other? Yes? Prove successful. I didn't, so the Monon Trail, we wanted to build it. It was far more successful than I ever envisioned in the beginning. People turn, the buildings face the trail now, not the street. We have higher people counts on the trail than you do on the streets on the other side of the buildings. I knew it would work. I knew people wanted it. I had no idea how successful that would be. That's probably the big one. Yes? You know, I always had support from our governors. Did not have support in the legislature, generally speaking. Some of them. You know, it's like anybody. You like some and dislike the position of other people. I liked everybody, but, you know, some of them didn't understand what we're doing. A lot of the rural legislatures have no idea what we're trying to do, or, you know, the ones that don't get out of the state much, and they don't understand what the competition is doing, what we have to do here in Indiana to compete. You know, we have 150 corporate headquarters in Carmel, regional or national significance. They pay a lot of taxes. And they're trying to hire people from all over the world, diverse people. And we've got to make it a welcoming place. We've also got to make sure it's a place that those people that they need to run those businesses are willing to live and raise their families and send their kids to school. If we can't do that, they're not going to expand in Indiana or Carmel, Indiana, and they're not going to, and they may leave. So the quality of life is how we did economic development. That is absolutely critical. So, any other questions? I'll hang around for a while if anybody wants to ask something privately. So, thank you very much. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you again to Mayor Brainard and to all of you for giving up your evening tonight to be here and to be inspired. And I hope that you'll stick around and ask more questions, because he has a wealth of knowledge. In just the short time that I've known Mayor Brainard, I've heard legends and tales, and I'm so glad that you did cover the roundabouts. I thought, are we going to get through this whole lecture without talking about roundabouts? So never. Okay. The man wrote the book. But again, Thank you to all of you for being here tonight. I hope you have a wonderful evening and leave here inspired. And thanks again to all of our sponsors who made this evening possible. Have a great night.